الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So to complete some of the other videos of what someone should do after Bayna Yadayk, I want to talk about how someone would go about studying Usool Al-fiqh. And studying Usool Al-fiqh is very, very important, and no one should ever think that this is a subject that is minor or that you really don't need much in it, that you only need just a little bit of, just need to get your feet a little wet in it and you can just move on from it. No, this is a very important subject because the basis of how any type of evidence is used comes back to someone's ability to bring out the understanding of the text. How does this text affirm what you're trying to talk about? And so, of course, when we talk about learning fiqh, we're talking about individual rulings for individual things. So what's the ruling on someone breaking his fast in Ramadan if he's sick? Okay, we're going to talk about this and we're going to look at the evidence for this. But in Usool Al-fiqh, we're going to talk about this evidence that we got here. How does this actually point back to the ruling that we're talking about? You know, and how does the evidence of this hadith, what are we looking at here? Is this wording? Is this a general wording, or is it mutlaq, or is it muqayyid? And so we're going to look at these different things in Usool Al-fiqh, and then once we understand how the evidences are being used, when we open up a book such as Iqna, like say we talked about that someone should look towards studying Iqna at an intermediate stage. When they look up and they read this book, they will then understand, oh, okay, this is how the ruling is being derived from here and there. Because he'll come up with the evidence, but most of the time, with the books of fiqh that you'll get, very rarely will they give you wajh al-dalala. And so like the wajh al-dalala is the way that this ruling is derived from this evidence. And so this is what you'll teach, you'll learn in Usool Al-fiqh, how the evidence itself is an evidence for this thing that we're trying to prove. And you'll also learn how to see if someone tries to pull out an evidence for something which is there's no evidence in it. You'll see how this works or doesn't work, and where is it weak and where is it strong. And so this is very important for someone, of course. And so me as a Shafi'i, I'll share the way that is the best way in the Shafi'i Madhhab according to my experience. And of course, if you have a teacher that's going through with you, of course, put priority over what the teacher that is in front of you has to say over what someone on YouTube such as me has to say about this. I'm a student of knowledge and whatnot, and I've been through, so I can say from my experience. But of course, if you have a teacher in front of you that's taught a certain book a lot of times and he says to do this one, go with him and run through it in this thing. But from the Shafi'i Madhhab, there's a couple main books that people would go through. The first of them is Al-Waraqaat. And so this is Al-Waraqaat here, and let me see here. And so this is the Taba Darib and Josie. It's okay. It's I wouldn't say I don't know if I would say that this is the best Taba, but it's okay. It works. And I since I bought it, I use it. And so this is also with the sharh of Al-Mahalli. And so this is also the go-to sharh for this book. Some people, they will take the matan first without going through the sharh necessarily. They'll just go through the matan by itself, and this is okay. Like if someone wants to go through it first with just the matan, and I also have a class that's finished on YouTube. You can look up that for Matan Waraqat, where I go through it very quickly to get people a general idea of what's in it. But of course, after that, like if you go through the sharh once, then you would go through it the sharh with a sharh. So you would go through an explanation of another sharh on top of it, which normally in the Shafi'i Madhhab we would say you go through it with al-Mahalli. And if somebody has high ambitions, maybe they go straight to the sharh with Mahalli, or if they are reading with their sheikh, they have the sharh Mahalli in front of them so that they can make the notes inside of that, and also there will be examples for all of the things that they're trying to learn. There will be examples there, and so this is one of the ways that someone would study. They would study this and then study with the Sharh Mahalli, and this is for a Shafi'i, for a Shafi'i, and also the Malikis and the Hanbalis for the most part. They are with us, like the Shafi'is, Malikis, and Hanbalis. we're almost all in the same boat. Like we have different books that are mu'tamid in our madhabs, but in the main issues, in the way that we deal with Usool Al-fiqh, we're almost always together on most things. And then we separate in a couple things. We'll say, okay, is this an evidence or is it not an evidence? And so then we'll branch out on some of these things. But in the most part, this is the something that is shared between us. So most of us start with Al-Waraqaat. So even if you're Maliki and you're like, okay, I'm going to start with Waraqat, yes, you can start with Waraqat. If you're Hanbali, most of them start with Waraqat. And the Hanbalis, and these days, they usually go with this book, Sharh Waraqat, by Shaykh Abdullah Salih Al-Fawzan, Shaykh Abdullah Salih Al-Fawzan. And this is not Salih Al-Fawzan, but this is Shaykh Abdullah. And so this is a good book. It's very easy. It has a bunch of, like this is from the Hanbali point of view. It has a bunch of examples that help bring out every single masala. I studied this book as well. And so I studied this one alongside of, after I went through the matan, I studied this. And then I went through and I read Sharh Mahalli afterwards because I had studied this. And this is more expansive than Sharh Mahalli, to be honest. But Sharh Mahalli is great, especially for just keeping it simple, sticking to the point. And Mahalli is known for being very concise. Rahimahullah ta'ala. He's very concise when he writes, and this is something you'll come back to. This is great to have an understanding of how he writes and the way that he will be very concise and point to things that he means without saying it. And this is something that a student definitely needs to learn and get used to, that kind of speaking. And if he doesn't get used to this type of speaking, he's going to either waste a lot of time with someone who over explains things, or he's going to read a bunch of books and not understand what's being said. Because you have to understand how people refer to things without necessarily explaining it. And so that's another important thing. So after you go through Waraqat and you go through a sharh on it, and as I mentioned, this is the Sharh Mahalli is the one to go through for the Shafi'i Madhhab. This is usually the go-to. There's one other sharh that also has been recommended, and it's more expensive. And this one is Wayt al-Ma'mun. This is another one. And this is, of course, it's more expansive. And some people have recommended this as a second stage. I didn't go through this way, but this is something that some other shuyukh have mentioned. But just to talk about this taba in the beginning, it has a huge, like I think it's like almost 100 pages, like 80 pages of introduction and whatnot about everything. And of course, for a brand new student, it's not necessarily going to help them a lot. But then it starts out here with the matan, and that's the matan. It's very clear. It's easy for him to read. And of course, if you wanted to go through the matan with the Matun Talib al-Ilm, they have like the big majmu'ah, and this is easy as well. Of course, there's some things that are missing in that. They dropped out a couple words here and there, or sentences here and there. I'm not for sure why. But so, and then these waraqat, literally it's like this page, this amount of pages is the whole text of Al-Waraqat. And then when we go to the sharh, this particular copy, they brought the sharh with no ta'liqat, like without any hawamish. So it's just the sharh, just like this. And so I use this for teaching, and this was easy, and I could add stuff on the side to it, and this is how I did it. And the sharh by itself is about 50 pages. And so if you think like this is a small book, but of course if someone understands it well, this will take them very far. And then they have at the end, like these 200 pages or so. These are all, this is the same sharh, but with a bunch of hawamish, a bunch of hashia. And for a student, maybe this is helpful for him if he wants to look over things and see what other people have to say. But for me personally, I like to keep the hawashi very minimal. And either like to have no hawashi sometimes is not the best. Like to have a little bit, and that's minimalist, is kind of better. And I actually prefer, I went through another copy, which was the Dar al-Diyat. Dar al-Diyat, they have a copy of Mahalli, which is a small booklet. It's I think that's what they would call a ruba'. It's like the smaller thing, like you have a mushaf size copy. And that was actually, I think, easier to read and whatnot. And I would recommend that one. It's actually a nice copy. I got rid of that one. I think I gave it to another brother, but this is another one that's out there, and there's many different copies. And I actually there was another copy that had the Sharh of Taqtazani in it as well. That was from Dar al-Alamiyya. That was actually very nice. I like that copy a lot. So after someone goes through Sharh Mahalli, the next step for them, normally what we would what we would do and study is we go into Lum'a. So this is اللمع للإمام الشيرازي أبي إسحاق الشيرازي. And so this is of the books that you'll spend a lot of time in. It'll be the first book that actually will get you somewhere significantly, like it gets you fired pretty significantly, and you'll want to spend a lot of time on it and actually read it over a bunch of times and ponder this book. And one of the things about like Imam Shirazi, of course, like he is in the 5th century, so he's of the early scholars, and his way of writing is something that's quite easy to understand, and he didn't like the later comers such as Mahalli, and also of Sheikh Zakaria al-Ansari. He has a way of writing that's very, very concise, and it's almost inaccessible to someone who hasn't already become familiar with the language that they use. And also, there's a reason that they write this way, because they've had a lot of debates beforehand about certain wordings, and so a lot of these wordings will have been highly debated. And there will be a huge debate on this. Like they'll literally have like hundreds of pages just talking about the definition of qiyas, or the definition of a had, like the definition of a definition. You know, they'll have huge pages on these definitions, and so you'll find at the end of it they'll give you a really, really like a strong definition, but at the same time maybe it doesn't give you a clarity to the meaning what they're talking about. Occasionally the definition will be very, very concise, and there will be no problem with the definition. It'll be perfect and immaculate, but then at the end of it you don't understand what's being talked about, you know, because like these are words that are very far out, or they seem strange. But in this book Al-Lum'a, it comes to you very easily, and there's a sharh on it that is online that I highly recommend. I'll leave a link to that in the bottom for the sharh of Lum'a, and that is done by a Salafi scholar, and it's actually it was a great sharh. And when I went through this, it was something I highly recommend for anyone after that. I've seen other people that have done a sharh on Lum'a, but I highly recommend this sharh in particular, because he definitely focuses on the things that need to be focused on. And there's also a lot of jadal inside of this, which is like arguments back and forth, and there's a lot of evidence for why this view is the strong view. So you'll give a lot of the evidences. Some of it you'll find it goes back to like the linguistically, like it goes back to lugha as the evidence, and saying like why does if there's a command, how does this necessitate wujub? And so then at the end of it you'll say, okay, because if a master said to a slave do this and he didn't do it, he'd be subject to repercussions, you know, like for something. So the same thing as if this is left, then if someone was not to do this, he would be blameworthy, and he would be deserving of a response, you know, and so, or iqab. So this is a book that's very, very good to go through. There's also another version of it that has Bughyatul Mushtaq. In this Bughyatul Mushtaq, it has a bunch of hawashi on the bottom that fills in extra things that are there. And just to note, like some of the hawashi and whatnot, these are from Ash'aris. So occasionally when it comes to certain aspects, especially when it comes to kalam, especially like when it comes to kalam, when it talks about kalam Allah, this is of the biggest issues that takes up a lot of noise with inside of the books of Usool Al-fiqh. And it's very like I would recommend very much so that someone studies Usool Al-fiqh with someone who is a solid person in the field, as well as that they make sure that they're Salafi and that they're knowledgeable of these debates, because they'll pop up in the middle of nowhere in Usool Al-fiqh. What you'll find is Usool Al-fiqh was originated, of course, by Imam Shafi'i, and Imam Shafi'i in his book Al-Risala, which I recommend after someone goes through this level and maybe the next level that I'll talk about, that they read Al-Risala and they ponder it and they try to understand what Imam Shafi'i was talking about in this book. Is very amazing for someone to read Al-Risala. But after Imam Shafi'i, he did this, he brought this about. A lot of the major players and writers in Usool Al-fiqh were people that were heavily involved in Ahl al-Kalam, or like in Ilm al-Kalam. So we have a bunch of them, like Al-Juwayni. This is the first one we study Al-Waraqaat, and Al-Juwayni, rahimahullah ta'ala, he delved into Ilm al-Kalam quite a bit. And of course, like his book Al-Waraqaat is mostly free of it. There's the minor things here and there maybe, but for the most part, there's not much in it. But in the books of Usool Al-fiqh, there's actually a debate between the Ash'aris and the Mu'tazilis that is almost never ending. It'll pop up in every page almost. And so this is something to keep in mind, that there is a back and forth between them where they go back and forth with their debates. And then also as Athari, there's also going to be debates to that, and occasionally the Athari will look at the views of both of them and say, you guys are both wrong, and occasionally lean towards some of them in some views, and of course it's good for someone to study this with someone who is Athari, so that they don't fall into the mistakes. Of course, Imam Shirazi, he was early on, so he doesn't fall into very many of these issues of kalam, such as the later comers. They fall more into it. But this is a good thing for someone to be mindful of. So Al-Lum'a, this is the second major level, because if you had Waraqat, if you took this with the Sharh at the same time, okay, then you finish Waraqat, then you go into Lum'a. Take this with the Sharh and make sure you understand it very, very well and read it through a lot of times. This is not a matn, so it's not something that you're going to be sitting there and memorizing necessarily. Maybe you memorize certain parts of it, such as the like the ta'rifat and whatnot, but you're not necessarily going to memorize it as a matn, but you will read it, and you need to understand where what is in there and what you're supposed to take out of it, and understand these issues very well. And so this is a great book to study. And I actually prefer books sometimes that are not matn in a sharh. Occasionally this is easier for someone to comprehend, because it's not trying to fall into the area of being super concise. The matn is trying to be super concise, so then the matn is busy with being concise, and occasionally it doesn't give you a bunch of examples that you need. And then when you get the sharh for the matn, the sharh is also busy with explaining what did the matn actually mean. And so some of this actually makes the actual meaning like it's stuck between these two things, these two extremes. When you have a book that just comes and it's just the book itself is the goal as a book as a whole, and it gives you everything that you need as a book as a whole, I like this. And this is اللمع في أصول الفقه. And so this is like the second or third level if you took the Sharh al-Mahalli. The next one after this, for Shafi'is in particular, this is غاية الوصول أو غاية الوصول إلى شرح اللب الأصول, and this is by Shaykh al-Islam ibn Zakaria ibn Muhammad al-Ansari, and so this is of the major works that someone would take when they look at Usool Al-fiqh. This is occasionally, sometimes people will say, after you do a Sharh Mahalli, go straight to this. And if someone did this, I think they would be lost. That's my personal opinion. I think it would be very, very hard for someone to step straight off of that boat and into this one, because this is basically a condensing of, like, there's the matn, which is here. Let's see here. So the matn is, let me see this in this amount of page. Yeah, it's about 100 pages. I believe the matn is about 100 pages, or not quite. And the matn itself is like this amount of pages is about the matn. And so this is a condensing of Jam' al-Jawami'. And Jam' al-Jawami' by Ibn Subki, this is of the most, and he says Jam' al-Jawami', that he got every single issue from all of the books of fiqh, or all of the Usool Al-fiqh, and he combined all of these issues into a really, really condensed package in Jam' al-Jawami'. And so this is a condensation of this, and then a sharh on top of it. And to jump the gun a little bit, just because this is a book that's after the book that I'm going to talk about afterwards, but this is the condensation of Jam' al-Jawami'. That's the matn itself. And then when we come to the sharh that Shaykh Zakaria al-Ansari rahimahullah, that he does on top of his matn that he has, it's basically it's a mukhtasar of Badr al-Tali', which is the book that I'll talk about right after this, which is and this is the best one to get. And in my opinion, there is another one out there. There's another taba out there, but I prefer this one because it has all of the people that are in there are talked about, and so you know where all of the people that gave a view on something, you'll know who said what. This is because of the hawashi at the bottom. But Badr al-Tali' is the go-to sharh that someone would study with Jam' al-Jawami'. And this sharh was taken by Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari, and he took this and he made it into Ghayat al-Usool. So he condensed it. He switched some of the things out there that weren't necessary, that he felt that weren't necessary, and then he put it in there, and he took out all the names of the people who held different views. So in Badr al-Tali', you'll see that this is the view of Imam al-Ghazali, and this is the view of Imam al-Haramain. And so you'll have, these are all the views are pointed to the people that said them. And in the Ghayat al-Usool, you'll find that these views just say waqila, waqila, waqila. You don't know who said what. And so you'll just get the different views, and then the major view that he states is the one that he views as rajih, and the one that he views is upon the madhhab of the Shafi'i madhhab. And of course, it's important to know that the Usuliyun, they were mujtahidun in their views when it comes to usul, even if in the furu' they were Shafi'i. So a lot of them are Shafi'i or Hanbali or Maliki. Like when it comes to usul, most of them are mujtahidun, so they won't necessarily have the same view as Imam Shafi'i when it comes to the usul. But yet when it comes to the furu', like the actual like fiqh, they'll say I'm Shafi'i, okay. And yet they will differ on with Imam Shafi'i in certain issues when it comes to usul. And of course, maybe this seems contradictory, but in these areas, they were not necessarily bound by a madhhab, and they were free thinkers in their own way of thinking about the issues in usul. And then they would follow the madhhab, and of course, like to actually come up with a madhhab from oneself, this is a monumental task, because it takes a lot. There's a lot of work that goes into it. So following a madhhab, of course, that's another discussion. But following a madhhab is much easier than, and it saves a lot of time for someone than for them to have to build one for themselves or build up a whole framework for themselves from the ground up. So taking something that's already built and using that is much better than you trying to recreate the wheel. And so going back to this, so you have Ghayat al-Usool, and this book will basically introduce you to all of the issues in Usool Al-fiqh. And the only problem with this book and also Badr al-Tali' is, as I mentioned before, there's a back and forth between the Mu'tazili and also the Ash'ari. So they go back and forth on certain issues. Some of it has fa'idah and some of it has no fa'idah. And then at the end of the book of Jami' al-Jawami', and also of course Ghayat al-Usool, since this is the same thing, it'll have a bunch of things about ilm la yanfa' wa la yadur jahlu. There's like certain ilm at the end of it, which it's like, if you understand it, great. From ilm al-kalam, they're like, if you understand it, then great. It's great for you to understand. But if you don't understand, no problem. There's no problem with you being ignorant of it. They talk about what is makan, like defining makan. Some of these things are ridiculous. Is the ism a part of the thing, or is it something separate than it? And like some of these things, is the ism of something, like the name of something, is it a part of the thing that's being named, or is it something separate? Some of these issues that have there's no real fa'idah, like there's no benefit for us knowing. This will be inside of there, and some of it's very difficult to put your mind around, to be honest. And so like to tire yourself on some of these things, there's no benefit to it. And also there's a lot of chapters in here that they'll talk about things, and there'll be a difference of opinion, and if you want to look at what is the thamara, or like what is the fruit of this difference of opinion, there will be no fruit whatsoever. So there'll be a difference of opinion. There's a big debate about this, that, and the other, about a certain type of wording. And then at the end of it, you'll never find anything in the Quran or Sunnah that has to do with this. You'll never find a fiqh ruling that has to do this. Or the only fiqh ruling you'll ever find that has to do with this is something that has to do with talaq. Like when somebody says something or another in a certain wording, it'll have a basis here. It'll have a difference of opinion in the ruling depending on the usuli thing, or in amen, like when someone swears about something, they'll use a certain weird wording, and this is the only difference of opinion. But when it comes to actual like Quran, Sunnah, it won't benefit you whatsoever. So occasionally there's certain places where I'll put la athar lahu. Like there's no actual benefit, and it doesn't change anything about whether or not you look at it this way or you look at it this way. It's not going to change anything about the reality of the situation. Or there's no benefit at the end of this discussion. There's no benefit in it other than putting your mind to work. But it doesn't actually have a benefit in any fiqh ruling. So occasionally this is very important when someone is studying Usool Al-fiqh, especially at the later levels, that they understand there's certain issues that the Usuliyun will talk about, but there's no benefit. to this. Like there's no benefit in the Quran or Sunnah. There's no fiqhi benefit that comes out of this, but rather it's just going into and kind of debates about issues that have no real meaning. And of course, this can waste your time. So when you know this, just take it with a grain of salt and keep moving. But the last, so if you have Usool, this is a great book. And I actually skipped this book in general. Like I skipped this before going to Jawami, because I had a class that was starting up with Jawami, and I didn't have a class for Usool. And I'd already studied Luma very well. And my Sheikh, he said, you can go straight into Jawami with us if you've already studied Luma very well. And then, so I went through it that way. And so then I went through Badr al-Talib with Jawami. And this, I went through that. And when I went through it, I went through the matan with my Sheikh, who was also referring to Badr al-Talib all the time. And I also took the recordings for Hassan Bukhari, Sheikh Hassan Bukhari. He is on like all of his recordings. He teaches in Bayt al-Haram, so in Masjid al-Haram in Mecca. So he teaches there, and he went through a lot of books. And so you can look at, of course, some of the books that he went through are Hanbali books, and some of them are also Shafi'i books, and also Maliki books. He's a mutakhassis in Usool, and it's very, his views are very strong. And so he went through Jawami. He has all of it recorded and explained. And so I would go through his recordings, and then I would also go to the class with my Sheikh. And then any of the issues that came up from that, I would usually go through the recordings before the thing would come up in my class, so I was already ready for it. And then I would refer to Badr al-Talib and write everything in Badr al-Talib. So when I would study Jawami, so you'll see Jawami, it's up top. When I study Jawami, then I'm going to write any of the notes that I need at the bottom. And also a lot of times when you'll find that there's certain examples that will be used for these issues, the issues are going to be the same examples in like most of the books. They'll reuse the same examples. And the reason they will reuse these examples is because these examples are tried and true, or like tried and proven over time. And occasionally people will use examples in the earlier books. They'll use examples that later comers would come up. They'll look at these examples and say, no, there's a problem with this example. It doesn't fit. And so that's why you'll see that they use a lot of the same examples for a lot of these issues. And of course, if you want more examples, there's other books to go in for that. But I would go through this, I'd look at the examples, make sure I understood it. Anything that was extra that wasn't in the sharh itself, then I would write this down on the side. I would make a note of this, anything, and I would use this as my Asl, or like my go-to book when it comes to Usool Al-fiqh. Almost everything you need in Usool Al-fiqh will be inside of this. Most things. Like, of course, there's going to be little issues here and there, but most of the basic issues of Usool Al-fiqh will be found in this. The wording, this is Badr al-Talib is the sharh of Jawami, and Jawami is the matan of Ibn Subki. And so he has this he has this very, very it's very, very tight, or like very, very concise. And he says that you can't make it any more concise than I did without ruining it. And of course, we talked about the other, yes, someone did make it more concise, but did he ruin it or not? It's not, I wouldn't say that's ruined, but of course, like the big benefits in Jawami is you know who said what. And so you have an idea of all of the scholars that are out there. And if a certain scholar said something, you know who is the one who says this particular view. And so that's the benefit of Jawami. So like having the names of who said what is very important, especially when you want to read other books, so you can have an idea of who says what, and you can understand. So if I'm reading a book from Imam Al-Ghazali, this is his view in this matter, and that this will help. So, and Badr al-Talib is the sharh, and it's very, very, the wording is also very, very concise. And so occasionally someone who struggles with this kind of ikhtisar, it will be hard for him to understand it and actually comprehend it really well. Like I would go through this with my with the sharh of the matan. I would have this sharh in front of me, and I would also read it alongside of it. And so alhamdulillah, this I like that kind of ikhtisar, but of course it does take a lot of pondering. And so like you reading 3 pages is going to take a lot longer from you reading another page that doesn't have the same thing. You could probably read 5 pages of another book in the same time that you would read like 2 or 3 pages from this. But when you want to review, it's very quick to review. If you understand what you're reading, it's very quick to review. And this is like the beauty of like that. And so this is of the books that you would go through. And you can go through this with great detail. If you go through just the matan and then you have the book and you refer to the sharh, great. Then after this book, like at this point,
you should be like studying something such as Minhaj al-Talibin. So like if I were to say Waraqaat comes around Abi Shuja. Like that same time, you'd study Waraqat along Abi Shuja. And then if you study Sharh and Abi Shuja or something a little bit over this, then you're studying the Sharh Mahalli and Waraqat. And then after you go with, like, say, Umdat Salik, or also if you were to do Al-Iqna, then you would study Luma alongside of this. These two would go alongside, and also Ghayat al-Wusul alongside of Al-Iqna. Once you come into Jama Jawama, this is when you should be studying Minhaj al-Talibin at this point in time. And also when it comes to Minhaj al-Talibin, I mentioned that there's two areas. You would either be studying Kanz al-Raghibin with Minhaj al-Talibin, or you just be studying the matan itself. And of course, Kanz al-Raghibin is also written by Al-Mahalli. So having a relationship with the author is great. So when you know how he writes, his style that he writes, also he's the one who wrote Jalalain. So like this concise style, when you have a relationship with him, by reading his books, it makes it much easier for you to understand what he has to say. But this book is definitely a bit harder. Badr al-Tali', some people say that this book is a little too hard because of its the way that it's concise and whatnot. And if you do find that something's not clear when you're reading this, you can go to the Asl of this, which is Al-Ghayth al-Hami'. And this is by Al-Iraqi. And so this Ghayth al-Hami' is a very nice book. It's very easy to read. Like this is a book that's easy to read. It breaks apart a lot of masail. It is more expansive. So like if you were to compare this book to the other, this is like in 3 mujallad that are small, and this is in 2. So like the size is a little more. And that is actually a condensed version of Tashnif al-Masami', which is by and so here's the new taba for this one. And this is by Az-Zarkashi. And so Tashnif al-Masami' is of course, like Az-Zarkashi is of the main imams when it comes to Usool Al-fiqh. And I've still yet to read this. I just got it recently. But I have gone back into some of the masail. Whenever I was stuck in a certain masala and I needed more clarity, I'd go back in the line of the shuruh. So you have Badr al-Tali'. This is the one that you'll be studying. And then if you're stuck on something, you can go to Al-Ghayth al-Hami'. And then if you get stuck there, you can go back to its original, which is Tashnif and Masami'. And there's also PDFs online. This is how I did it before I got the taba. I'd go back to there and I'd study it and I'd see. And sometimes just the difference in wordings helps out a whole lot. Because each one of these, like this is like you could say is almost the asl, or the foundation from which Ghayth al-Hami' was a ikhtisar of that. And then also Badr al-Tali' is kind of an ikhtisar of Ghayth al-Hami'. And all of them go back to Tashnif and Masami', pretty much, which is that more expansive sharh, and that's like either in 4 fat volumes or 3 fat volumes. And then after someone goes through this level, of course, then you're free. Like you can read a lot of the other things. Of course, I would recommend that someone reads Risala, as I mentioned before, by Imam Shafi'i. And of course, if you get in Kitab al-Umm, if you get like that particular publication, there is a Risala in the first part of it. If you were to get the one that's from Dar al-Hazan, like, so this is al-Umm, the first majallad of al-Umm is going to be a Risala. And this is like I didn't read from this one. Like this one has a lot of footnotes as well. And it's after the taba that comes from Ahmed Shakir. And I have the taba that was like the tahqiq of Sheikh Ahmed Shakir, and of course he found one of the best manuscripts. He did tahqiq on that, and so this is a really great book for someone to read and ponder. And also I recommend for those who are Salafis, like if you don't read the works of Imam Shafi'i, then I was like I ashukku fi salafiyatik. So I would say that you're not like, you haven't been initiated into the rights of like Salafiyah unless you've read the books of Imam Shafi'i, especially Risala. And also he has another book called Jamal, and he is Nasr al-Sunnah. And so like you'll see the way that his dalil, and the way that he builds like a logical dalil for following the Quran and the Sunnah above all else. Like this is something you'll find in a Risala, and it's something that a lot of the scholars have talked about. They just keep reading it over and over and over again, and every time that they read it, they get more and more benefits. And so, like, I'm about to go through reading it another time, and this is a beautiful book, though, and there's many things in it that are just absolutely imperative that a student understands. There's a couple other things that I'll just mention on the side. This book here, which is called Al-Muharrar, and this is for a lot of the views of Imam Shafi'i that will be talked about, such as Al-Istihsan. This is one of the ones that my Sheikh, he brought up this book when it comes to the book of Istihsan, when it comes to the bab of Istihsan, when you talk about what is this, and also of the Qawl al-Sahabi in Madhhab Shafi'i. And he brings up this in there, and also talking about naskh, I think he talks about this and other things. But this particular book, it brings up a view that actually shows the strength of some of these views, such as Qawl al-Sahabi, is it hujjah or no, in the Shafi'i madhhab. And the later comers in the Shafi'i madhhab, they basically, almost all of them, they say one thing, and you'll find it in Usool, he says no, it's not a hujjah. Qawl al-Sahabi, and of course there's much detail, there's a lot of details to this. Maybe in the future I'll do a video on that, but they'll say it's not a hujjah. But in the reality of the situation is, Imam Shafi'i actually takes it. He takes this hujjah, he takes the Qawl al-Sahabi that is by himself, that was not, and what he said in this particular issue was connected with something that has qiyas. Like, there's something it is connected with qiyas. There's qiyas alongside of it, whether it's something that is apparent or whether it's the meaning that is taken from Quran and Sunnah that also is alongside of it. If he sees this and there is some type of qiyas alongside of it, and it doesn't go against any Quran and Sunnah, he's going to take it. He'll take it. But if it does go against Quran and Sunnah, maybe he will say, no, the apparent Quran and Sunnah is this way, even if one Sahabi said something by itself. So there are some details into that to say that's not a hujjah. This is something that would that needs to be looked at more. And this particular book, it goes into Qawl al-Sahabi, also goes into istihsan. And istihsan is one of those issues where Imam Shafi'i went very, very hard against those who actually used istihsan. And then when we look at the books now and they say, what is istihsan? They'll say it's changing qiyas from, it's like taking one qiyas over another one for a reason. Okay, for that reason, okay, this is something. But Imam Shafi'i, he used to go very, very hardcore. He said, فَمَنِ اسْتَحْسَنَ فَقَدْ شَرَّ, أو كما قال رحمه الله. And so, like, whoever did istihsan, then he is basically made something up in the deen that has no basis. And he was very, very harsh, and even has letters against people using istihsan. And if it was this meaning that is now well known as istihsan, then he wouldn't have been so up in arms about it, because this meaning is completely fine, and he himself speaks with it. So so this is a different issue. And so occasionally there's certain issues such as istihsan, qawl al-sahabi, and these two issues, I go to this book for that. Also another book, which is right here, which is great when you are studying Usool Al-fiqh, is that you don't study Usool Al-fiqh void of multiple examples. So when you study Usool Al-fiqh, occasionally you'll be talking about something, and you won't have an example really for what you're discussing, such as, like, maybe it's naskh, or maybe it's an example of do we take is like the Quran. Like, so if we say the Quran, if we have a certain qira'ah that's shadda, and so is this an evidence or not? And so let's go see where this would be an evidence or not. And they'll say, no, it's not an evidence, because if it was like Quran, then it would be. Or some of them say, yes, it was an evidence. So there's certain books like this which will go into, they will pull out the furu'. They'll do takhrij al-furu' al-usul. So they'll pull out some of the issues that actually come up in regards to this masala from the big books, such as this pulls it out from Tuhfat al-Muhtaj. So this is by Shaykh Murtada al-Dagestani, rahimahullah ta'ala. So he wrote this book, which is called Al-Madkhal ila Usool Al-Imam Shafi'i. And in this book, he takes a lot of the issues that come up in Usool Al-fiqh, and then he will talk about them. So for example, تعريف الإجماع وحجيته. So he'll talk about this, and then he'll talk about إجماع السكوتي, and then he talks about إجماع السكوتي. Okay, now he's going to talk about what are the issues that have إجماع السكوتي, and he'll bring multiple مسائل that come up from this, and then he'll bring out where did people differ in this with the different madhhab. So these people say no, it's not. They have a different issue about this, and so he'll bring it up which each one said what about this particular masala. And also, for example, like here he talks about the shar' man qablana. So of course, like the sharia that's before us, he breaks down the issue and where is the issue of khilaf, like the shara'i such as like from Israel, from Bani Israel. And so he'll talk about this issue, and then he'll bring in where the certain things such as like وَكَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ فِيهَا أَنَّ النَّفْسَ بِالنَّفْسِ وَالْعَيْنَ بِالْعَيْنِ وَالْأَنْفَ بِالْأَنْفِ وَالْأُذُنُ بِالْأُذُنِ وَالسِّنَّ بِالسِّنِّ وَالْجُرُوحَ قِصَاص. So this, we have this ayah that comes here, and this is something that Allah is giving us and knowledge that this is something that he made for their sharia. Now, is this an evidence that we can use in our sharia? And of course, the Shafi'i opinion is no. The evidence, the sharia that came with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is nasikha. Like this completely abrogates what is before of it. Of the furu'. Of course, like the usool, such as usool al-diyana of tawheed and whatnot. Of course, this is established. I'm believing in the messengers and the malaika, and also of the basics of akhlaq. This is something that stays the same without a doubt from every sharia. But some of the furu', this is what changes, and he would say this, and so he'll bring it up in some areas on this. So when it comes to qisas, is this actually used? Do we use qisas from this ayah or not? Or do we use other things? We have to use other evidences for this. So he breaks down this issue, and it's actually very, very nice in this. And this is of a thing after someone has gone through has gone through some of the larger books, that they go through some of these books and they see the way that Usool Al-fiqh actually plays out into the furu'. And then this will also help them if they're teaching as well. I would use this when I was teaching to get more examples. So, because occasionally the books will limit themselves to the same example that has been used all like 100 different times to explain a certain issue. And this will help someone get like more examples of, okay, this issue actually has multiple issues. And there's also another book like this that is for, that uses al-iqna' as the basis of getting an example from iqna' that has to do with this particular usuli principle. This is an introduction, inshallah, to someone when they're studying usul al-fiqh. Of course, usul al-fiqh takes a lot of comprehension that someone needs to really think, and they need to do their best to try to make sure that they're focusing in these classes, and it's something that will help them in everything else. Of course, usul al-fiqh, as some of my shaykh has said, like my shaykh in tafsir, he says this is usul al-fahm. Like this is the basis of understanding. And Imam Shafi'i, when he wrote Ar-Risala and also his other works in Usool Al-fiqh, he actually put down a science of understanding, not just the Quran and Sunnah. He put out an understanding of understanding nusus, or texts in general. And so he is actually a go-to for the lawmakers of the Western world. They actually go back to his science of how does he pull out a text, and how do we look at this is and this is khas, and how do we put these two texts together and work with both of them. So like the judges and other like legal systems, they actually use the science that Imam Shafi'i put together and Usool Al-fiqh, and that he's the first one who wrote it. Of course, this was understood within the Arabs, but this is something, the first one that wrote it was Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah ta'ala. And so this understanding of how do we work with text in general is something that will benefit you in every other area. So if you're reading something in Nahu, you're going to use Usool Al-fiqh and Nahu, especially when you go into, when they have differences of opinion in Nahu. There's actually Usool Al-Nahu. Like there's and they actually use similar things to Usool Al-fiqh. Of course, there's some minor differences between Usool Al-Nahu and Usool Al-fiqh, but they come hand in hand in many areas. Also, when you're reading Balagha, the Balagha and Usool Al-fiqh have a very, very, very strong connection between them. And Usool Al-fiqh actually talks about things that Balagha doesn't even talk about. And Balagha, of course, will complement the other side of Usool Al-fiqh because they assume that you know Balagha. So when you learn these two together, there's a very huge connection between them. And there's an overlap between these two sciences. There's also a big overlap between the books in Usool Al-fiqh, as I mentioned, with Aqidah. The only way that you can understand Aqidah well is understanding Usool Al-fiqh well as well. Because you have to understand, how do you base your Aqidah off of the Quran and Sunnah. Okay, how did we say that this is actually dalil? And how can we answer someone who, if they go against us in a certain issue, how do we actually look at that and understand the dalil, how it's being used? Also, the other ways, the other places that this will come up is in tafsir as well. And so for someone when they are studying tafsir in ulum al-Quran, which is a huge, ulum al-Quran encompasses tafsir and encompasses much more than tafsir as well. But this is a major part that someone will need to have an understanding in Usool Al-fiqh for them to understand ulum al-Quran properly. And so, because there's areas, and of course, understanding the Quran comes back to lugha. And there's areas that lugha didn't explain about the Arabic language, that Usool Al-fiqh actually took it and it said, here is something that we have to understand about lugha, and they will go to great depths that you won't find in the books of lugha, about like certain subtle meanings of certain things that are like things that can be pulled out from the Arabic language and in the Quran. And so these are some of the areas that someone needs to, they need to have a solid foundation in Usool Al-fiqh for them to help them in all of these areas. And of course, when someone has an understanding of Usool Al-fiqh, it will help them so much not to be deceived by the people that are out there that are enemies of Islam, because they will have a basis. They understand the Quran, they understand the Sunnah. And if somebody uses it in a way like such as Ahlul Bid'ah, or someone who wants to deny the Sunnah,
when somebody has a proper foundation in the deen and how the texts are used, this is something that they're able to combat the shubuhat that come out with much more efficiency than someone who barely understands how these evidences are being used. Because you'll find that some of the people that deny the sunnah, or that they deny ijma', and they deny these other things that are, they assess like the foundations of our deen, these people, they will use texts in the strangest of ways that go against the principles of Usool Al-fiqh. And also, like, the principles in Usool Al-fiqh are based upon logical reasoning and like an understanding of the Arabic language. So these people will use these things and they'll twist words here and there, but someone who has understanding of Usool Al-fiqh, they can see straight through this nonsense and they can point at the inconsistencies that are there, as opposed to someone who doesn't understand Usool Al-fiqh. They will see this person, okay, yeah, he's using Quran to back up what he's saying, but does this have any evidence to what he's saying? No. And so this is why you'll have to look back and understand Usool Al-fiqh very well if you really want to be a defender of the deen. And this is why when I think about some of the biggest defenders of the Sunnah and biggest defenders of the deen in general, we look back at Imam Shafi'i, and he was there on the front lines at the beginning, and he wrote the basics of how we understand the texts. And after him, for anyone to go and play with the text of the Quran and Sunnah, they have to go through his like his framework and the foundations that he set in Usool Al-fiqh. They have to bypass him if they want to get to these things. And like, for the most part, everyone has agreed upon the general principles of Usool Al-fiqh, and then there's small differences that happen here and there. And Imam Shafi'i, he is of those people that when the secularists and these people that deny the Sunnah and whatnot, if they want to come in and do real damage, they realize they can't do any real damage until they somehow get past the work of Imam Shafi'i and Usool Al-fiqh, because he made it very clear that people can't just play with the text and wiggle it around in the way that they wish, but they have to bring it back and look at it all in its context and understand that some things are am and some things are khas, and all of these things must be put together, and that we don't throw parts out just to prove another part with something else, but rather we see that this is a full picture. And I hope this is enough for today. And may Allah give us knowledge that is beneficial and guide us to that which He is pleased with. Wassalatu wassalamu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. And if you found this video beneficial, please like and subscribe. And if you wish to support me with financial support, then feel free to look at the bottom and support me either on Patreon with a monthly contribution or with a one-time contribution on something such as Zelle or PayPal. And that is much appreciated from you so that I can continue to do this work, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.